Okay, so by my reckoning, it's 7 o'clock. It is, of course, a Thursday evening. It must be time for a RDA weekly webinar. Thank you very much for joining for our first one of the year. And we were very keen at this point to feedback on the consultation that's being carried out around the new RDA strategy. Some of you may be coming along because you took part in that consultation and you would like to sort of hear the bigger picture about what we heard. Others of you, you may be coming new to it, so hopefully you'll still be able to pick up some of the bigger themes and get something from that. So as you know, we're joined this evening as well by Ed Bracher, RDA Chief Executive. But I'm going to kick off first just by introducing a bit more about the process that we went through and some of the sort of top line findings. And then I'll be asking Ed to talk through a bit more about some of the themes that have come out of that and our reflections on that. As ever, just a little bit of housekeeping. You are welcome to use the chat for questions. I will be kind of looking through those and hopefully we've got time to get through those at the end. I would sort of stress, I may not need to do this, but this isn't part of the strategy consultation. So please don't make your questions feedback about the strategy, if you see what I mean. Hopefully, if you've wanted to do that, you've had a chance to do that. And your questions this evening might be about things that you hear tonight. So pop those in the chat box if you wish. Let me tell you a little bit about the process that we went through. As many of you will know, we recorded a 30-minute presentation with Ed Bracher taking us through the plans for the strategy. And that was, the link to that was distributed and both internally and also to other contacts that we had. And that presentation has been viewed by about 880 people. In addition to that, we held 4 face-to-face consultation workshops around the UK for much more sort of in-depth conversations, which were attended by about 65 people. So just thinking about those workshops for now, the kind of overall impressions on that was that people were positively engaging by the plan and do seem motivated by it. There weren't any areas that people had particular actual sort of problems and disagreements about. One of the things which tends to happen with a strategy process anyway, and particularly in RDA, where we know lots of people respond to things more practically, is a sort of frustration about where's the action, what's actually going to happen. And as I say, that's a natural part of a sort of strategy process. And sometimes that's a bit of, you just have to sort of trust in the process that the actions and the action plans will come from this. So just looking at the 6 big areas that the strategy focused on, in terms of growth, people were positive about our ambition and the scale of that ambition. There was strong support for more work for people with mental health and for groundwork activities, strong support for developing more strategic partnerships, and a need to develop more and stronger links with schools and the education system. In terms of sort of strengthening the organisation, people felt that we were identifying the kind of key barriers to growth and development, and that there was a kind of positive response about the idea of us trying to sort of broker demand, so actively going out and working to try and build partnerships. There were understandable concerns around stresses to do with the coaching pathway, the need for more volunteers, and the coaching plan, support around charging riders, but wanting support and advice on doing that. And people very much talking about the idea that sort of leadership in individual groups can be a barrier to growth. Regional hubs, when we look at the structure of RDA, the idea of regional hubs was warmly received. We shouldn't be assuming everybody can access things online, which is absolutely fair. And people really interested in the idea of sort of cross-pollination of ideas. On the engagement piece, which is sort of more in my area, there was really strong agreement in favour of more engagement with participants, which is really good to hear. And additionally with volunteers too, as a matter of fact. And the hope that better use of data across the organisation would actually help to ease that. So we also asked people who were looking at the YouTube video to sort of feedback through the survey. Now, I'm really hesitant here to take you through a whole list of percentages of this, said this and that. So I'm just going to give you some broad highlights here, and then I'll ask Ed to talk about some of these wider themes. But in terms of the survey that we did after the YouTube presentation, an overwhelming 94% of people who responded to that said that RDA has a responsibility to ensure that more people can benefit from horses, and that people considered our target of 35,000 people by 2025. The majority of those people said that that was about right. 94% of people felt that our commitment to strengthen the network broadly addressed the areas that affect them and their experience of RDA. And the majority of people felt that our plans to increase the support at local level will make a positive difference. As mentioned before, it was unsurprising to see then that in the survey, the vast majority of people felt that we should be consulting with and getting feedback from more people in the RDA family, and lots of people would feel more comfortable using technology to be able to do that. In general, over half of respondents said that the strategy contained elements that will improve their experience of RDA. I was very mindful, however, of the fact that when it came to RDA participants doing the survey or participant representatives, that half of those people actually weren't sure if their experience would be improved. So when we come to actually rolling out the final strategy, I think we need to be thinking more carefully about making sure that participants can see themselves reflected in the strategy and what we're trying to do. I'm going to introduce Ed Bracher to you now. He's going to tell us a little bit first about some of the external consultation that we did, and then he's going to talk us through some of the broader themes that came out of the results of the consultation. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and Happy New Year, everybody, if it's not too late to say that. And this is, I think, an exciting process, and it's great to be able to bring this feedback to you. So, as Caroline said, as well as talking to lots of people within RDA, we did a couple of specific meetings, I think probably most interestingly with both the British Equestrian Federation and with Sport England being key partners and people that we want to engage in this. And coming out of this was, or coming out of that, the overall sense was one of they were pleased and excited by the ambition. I think both organisations were, they recognised the value that RDA brings to the sort of disability activity landscape in the UK, and want to see more of that happen as we do, and importantly really want to help us deliver that. Sport England particularly, and alongside them Sport Scotland, are keen on what they're calling place-based activities, so things that are maybe managed or overseen nationally, but actually where there's a focus on the localism and the location where things are happening, which has a strong resonance with both our strategy and, as you'll hear in a minute, some of the kind of overarching themes of the feedback, which was really helpful. And I think in all cases we had feedback which won't be a surprise to you about just being careful about the scale of what we're trying to do based on the starting point of coming out of the pandemic. And it was in some senses reassuring, but possibly unhappily so, to know that RDA is not alone in still struggling to get back up and running after the pandemic. So it was interesting to me to hear, for example, at Sport England, that across physical activity generally and specifically within the disability world, people are finding that getting back to larger groups is a problem. So lots of clubs are opening and lots of places are opening, but they're not doing it at quite the scale they were doing it pre-pandemic, and that is continuing to be the case. Well, I was going to say even now, but that suggests we're out of it, which of course we're not. So the overwhelming sense though was one of positive support and real will to get behind what we're doing, which was great. So following on from what Caroline said, I guess what I really wanted to do was think about some of the more broad themes, so less of the actual detail and more of the themes that we heard. And this is joining together both the things we heard in the face-to-face meetings, but also particularly importantly, I think the free text responses we got on the online survey. And it's one thing to tick a box and say yes or no to a black and white question, but actually we get a lot more depth and a lot more interesting responses out of the actual text responses we got. So just wanted to try and draw some themes out of that. I guess most importantly, the sense I got, and particularly from going around to the face-to-face meetings, was one that there is a will for the organisation growing. People want that sense of ambition. I think many groups and many volunteers are aware that there's more demand than we can meet, and for a lot of people that's a frustration. So what can we do to try and enable and support not necessarily groups to suck up all of that extra demand, but to make sure that we can actually help those people that want to be engaging with horses for their benefit to do so. However, so while saying everyone was really up for growth and ambition, there's quite a big sort of but that comes at the end of that, which is that which I'll pick up, but without going into lots of detail, there are lots of reasons why people quite rightly, and I'm one of them myself, I think, have areas where we're concerned or where we think which we need to address before large-scale growth can actually become a reality. So that notion, which is very much core to our strategy of having the strength and sustainability priority, which then allows the growth to happen, I think was fed back to us. So as I said, I want to just to pick up on some of the themes that came out. And the first one of these, which was really pleasing for me to hear, was the desire for more collaboration. So as I said, there was a good response and a positive response to the idea of growth, and also to the idea of diversifying our services and diversifying the people we're here to support. But that across the board seems to be underpinned by the idea of more collaboration. And really, there were three types of collaboration that came out very strongly within this process, and in no particular order. But first was collaboration between RDA groups, and I think we're an organisation that's very good at focusing on our little bit and getting really involved with that, and sometimes forgetting that there's a wider organisation out there that we can engage with. So we heard quite a lot about people wanting to share resources, share experiences, share waiting lists perhaps, and actually get systems going where, if I can't accommodate a rider in my group, I have a system where we can see whether there are other groups locally that can support that person. So there's lots of ways that we can try and support that and make that happen. But it was really good to see that, and if we can make a reality of that, I think that will make the organisation stronger. Broadening it out slightly, there was also collaboration with local riding schools, and we have the Accessibility Mark programme where we're working with commercial riding schools. But I think there was some strong recognition that could be expanded, perhaps made easier to take part in, and would bring real results. So we know that the riding schools that have downtimes, if you like, where maybe they could be accommodating some of the people who we can't accommodate. And particularly, we had some really interesting discussions as well at some of the meetings about those riders who have maybe met a particular goal that RDA can really help them achieve. And that's created a level of confidence and ability in that rider that might make it easier for them to move on. So collaborating with the wider equestrian network around the groups and what RDA UK can do to facilitate that was an important part of it. And then thirdly, collaboration with external partners. And it's not quite as simple as this, but if we have space and horses and people and are willing, and somebody else has people who can benefit and expertise to help that happen, then we should be partnering up with those organizations. And I think we got a sense that a lot of people bought into that idea as a way of delivering delivering growth. And I guess there's a bit in here about, across all of those things, about saying if possible, we don't want to reinvent wheels. Apologies to carriage drivers, but by making sure we make use of the skill and resources and availability of things out there, we can probably get more people going. And also, there's a strong element of this about keeping things local and about working within local networks. And I'll come back to that because I think that's a really important theme that came across the whole thing. The second area was around diversification, and this is both diversifying the services we offer and also the people we support. And I guess it's really important to stress, and this came across, that there's a lot of support for that, provided that we continue to support the activities and the services and the people that we've built up and done so much for over the last 50+ years. And that, yes, that's absolutely vital. We're not suggesting that we're going to replace one thing with another, but we can diversify and do more. I don't think it'll be a surprise to know that non-mounted activities and mental health were really strong themes coming out here. And again, this is where the previous ideas of collaboration could really help. And there are people out there already doing that well that are willing to work with us. And tapping into their experiences. I think the groundwork element of this, I think, is really important. Many groups have got much more involved with that over the pandemic, and I hope that we can sort of continue that momentum and build on it so that we don't lose that. And of course, it does enable us to be bringing more different people into contact with horses and gaining from it. And there was a nice quote actually that came out, which I liked, about this being about encompassing more people within the RDA family. So it's about that diversification, which I think was really important. Third area is around communications and engagement and people feeling they're heard and listened to, and that's acted upon. I guess nobody's ever done any kind of consultation ever in the whole of history where communication hasn't been something of an issue. But I think what was really good here was there's a sense of wanting more rather than necessarily just wanting different. So it's clear that people want to communicate more, not just in terms of receiving information from ourselves, but in terms of communicating with each other and building up those networks. So again, back to that collaborative idea. But they also want to feel engaged and listened to, and that was good for us to hear, because this is a very core and important part of the plan. So as I said, it's not just us providing information to groups and to volunteers and riders. I realise that there's a balance that we need to strike between providing enough information and overloading people, and also targeting the information to the right people. But importantly, there's a strong theme coming out about a will for more communications between groups in a local area, having the ability to get together to discuss common problems and for those to be things that can be either fed back, so we or the region or the county can provide support that's tailored to those needs, or for the groups to have an opportunity to get together and solve issues themselves. So I think that was really valuable and important, and certainly we want to act on that. And there was also stuff about communications to specific groups of people, so whether that's specific volunteer groups or participants, or indeed other groups within the RDA network, and how we can get those people talking to each other. I think that's really important, and we need to think hard about that. There's a bit about making sure we use a variety of different platforms to get information out there and to communicate. So we all know over the last couple of years that things like this and electronic communication has become really important. But I think importantly and pleasingly from my point of view was a plea to make sure that we also think about getting back to face-to-face meetings and ways for people to get together. Interestingly, in terms of engagement and being heard, there's quite a strong call for more visits and more face-to-face visits and listening directly from RDA UK, and I think that's an important thing for us to hear. And there's a bit of work for us to do, perhaps, to make sure that everybody fully appreciates that volunteers working at a county and regional level are part of the RDA UK team. So I hope when people are saying that, they're not just referring to the relatively small team at National Office, but also I think there was some input and some feedback about both formal and informal systems for people to give us their feedback. So interestingly, quite a number of people suggesting and feeling comfortable with the idea of surveys coming out and actually specifically asking for specific information, but also having informal forms of feedback that are accessible to everybody. So those people who might find one means of communication more difficult, or who perhaps aren't so competent to just pick up the phone or write an email, have a way of getting information back to us, and making sure that we can manage that, again, this word localism, we can manage that at as local level as possible. So again, I think that's really important, so that local, regional and county teams, for example, can pick up common issues in their areas, and in the nicest possible way. We don't necessarily want all of that coming immediately to National Office, because that's also hard to manage. So I thought there was some really, really interesting and helpful feedback in that whole bit. I think we are committed to doing all of that. We have quite a comprehensive data management plan, which we know we need to get going, and that will help us do all of that, and make sure that we can allow those people to communicate with each other and with us in a way that really suits them. The next big theme, again, no surprise, but is around volunteering, and absolutely what we heard, and I'm sure what many of you are experiencing, is concern about getting volunteers involved, perhaps not just getting those volunteers to come along and do a weekly session, but it's much harder to get volunteers to take on positions of responsibility, so become coaches, becoming group trustees, or taking on regional and county roles. We know that's a real issue and barrier for us, and that came across loud and clear from this. So how do we make it easier to access being a volunteer, being a coach, being a trustee, and how do we develop that? So we have in the strategy identified that as a key area for us to work on, and we will be putting in place more support for both recruiting volunteers and supporting volunteers. But again, this comes back to the idea of making sure we do this in a local fashion. I don't think anybody wants us from Warwick to try and be recruiting volunteers in I don't know, Aberdeen or Southampton. It's quite hard for us to manage that process, but we have to find ways that we can do that, which will allow your groups and your regions to get those people in place. Particularly in the face-to-face consultations, there was some really good discussion about regional and county volunteers and the stresses on them and the stresses that trying to grow the organisation is going to put on that. And within the plan, you will have seen that there's proposals that we will take on paid staff at regional levels to try and address that. There was some concern about that, and I understand that, and the loss of the sort of volunteering ethic of RDA. But I think there was also, perhaps more importantly, there was a greater level of recognition that can relieve the pressure and help us do that. So that takes us neatly onto finance, and again, no surprise that there were some concerns around the finance side, and again, this is back to collaboration, and really it was about how we might work better together, and a lot of will and support for the idea of working better together to get more money. But clearly there's a need to focus on supporting all parts of RDA to grow their income to deliver this. And it links neatly into the next point, that there's a very clear and strong message coming from a number of people that we need to preserve quality and the reputation we've got for the service we deliver. So there's a balance to be struck between an ambitious plan to grow, being efficient, but maintaining high standards. And we must work to retain our high standards. So that's a message that's come across loud and clear, which we have absolutely heard. And additionally, the need to balance, if you like, regulation guidance, all the boring paperwork and the things that we don't like, with making it as simple as possible. And I think we've heard that as well, and that's been an issue for many years, really, and that's a part of work that we will continue to do. So overall, I think there were three big overarching themes, which I've spoken a bit about already. Firstly, about collaboration, and this together we can do more idea, the idea of together we can do more, both within our own network and within the equestrian world and more broadly. And that was real music to our ears, because that is very definitely a core part of the plan. Secondly was this idea of localism, which I think came out more strongly than we expected. It links neatly with the idea of local regional hubs, where we can enable training and support to be focused onto the local need, and where we can recognise the differences between Aberdeen and Southampton, so that we don't try and always fit the same thing into to every area. And finally, I think what came across really clearly was the need to make sure that both are the way we make sure that we can tailor our support to the different needs of different groups, and that we recognize, so there's a call for us to recognize the difference between groups. Well, we do recognize that, but we've also recognized in the creation of this strategy that we have been trying to deal broadly similarly with all types of RDA groups, and we know that we need to adapt that support, and that came across very loud and clear in the feedback. So, some groups will be really keen to grow and really want to get more people in, and we will and can support that. Other groups won't feel in a position to grow right now, and that's fine too, and we will support that. But wherever your group or your part of RDA is, we want to make sure that we will give the right support to help groups become sort of confident and ambitious about their future. And I think that balance between helping groups deliver that confidence and ambition, but recognizing that groups are different and therefore we can't treat you all exactly the same way, is possibly the most important message that's come out of here. So that's my gallop through those themes. I think, Caroline, unless you've got anything more to add, I think that's pretty much the end of what I wanted to say.
That's great. And looking at the timing, you've done extremely well. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up something which actually, coming back through a lot of the responses today, that had struck me. And when you were talking about the feedback and the engagement communication thing, that actually the other thing is what a creative and innovative organisation we are, and so many of the ideas, specific ideas that have come out of just asking people, so the idea of collaboration, people are then supporting that with a list of organizations they think we could be reaching out to. People are talking about ways we can be adapting activities, way we can be more diverse, embracing different and new ways of doing things and coming up with ideas of doing that. And I think where we are potentially missing a trick is if we haven't got that communication channel to be hearing those ideas, we're missing out, and we're perhaps also not being able to reflect some confidence back to those groups to say, yes, please crack on and make that happen. And so anything that I can do, and that the staff team can do in the future to sort of ease that path is obviously really, really great news. We wanted to just quickly talk about, so next steps on this is that having gathered all of this feedback, we then use that to create what will become a kind of final strategy document, and start kicking off with some of the plans. So there's already group of volunteers meeting around an equine plan, group of volunteers meeting around volunteer development and recruitment plans. So some of those plans starting to be kicked off, ready for the strategy to be launched at the beginning of April, which is our kind of new financial year, when all of this kicks off. Personally, I wanted to sort of finish and sum up with something we asked. One of the questions we asked in the survey was about which word or phrase best describes what RDA should be like in 2029. Some amazing answers to that, but doing a sort of word cloud to find out which the most popular words were. The most popular words were inclusive, thriving, welcoming, and amazing. And I'd like to hope that we have an RDA that's like that now, but certainly if we're all working towards that point for 2029, I think that would really, really be what success would look like for me. So on that note, I'd like to thank you very much all for attending tonight, particularly because the numbers seem to be going up of attendees during the session. So perhaps people were clamoring to join us. And my thanks very much to Ed for joining us this evening. And I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, everybody.